We live in uncertain times. On the one hand, there are growing economic hardships, and the world seems to be tottering on the brink of a major recession, going by experts' forecasts. On the other hand, we have increasing strife, conflict, violence, and chaos in many parts of the world. Barely had the world come to terms with the Ukraine war, which is now in its second year, that we are now faced with a grave security situation in yet another country. Sudan is today a ticking time bomb. Over the next 1 hour, we'll deconstruct for you the Sudan challenge and why we all need to be concerned. So why is Sudan grabbing international headlines? And why do observers believe that the country is sliding into a civil war? Let's give you the basic facts first. Sudan is a country located in northeastern Africa. It is one of the largest countries on the African continent, spread over 1.9 million square kilometers. Sudan is also one of the poorest countries in the world, with 46 million people living on an annual income of $750 each. The population of Sudan is predominantly Muslim. Now, why is Sudan in the grip of violence? Why is the situation there spiraling out of control? The violence follows days of tension as members of the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, a paramilitary group, were redeployed around the country last week in a move that the army saw as a threat. What lies at the heart of these tensions that we are talking to you about? Now, since the 2021 coup, Sudan has been run by a council of generals led by the two military men at the center of this dispute. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the armed forces and in effect the country's president, and his deputy, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemedti. Now, General Dagalo is also the leader of the paramilitary group, Rapid Support Forces, which grew out of Darfur's notorious militias. General Burhan and General Dagalo are both looking to seize control of Sudan. This comes 2 years after they jointly carried out a military coup and derailed a transition to democracy that had begun after protesters in 2019 helped force the ouster of a long-time autocrat, Omar al-Bashir. In recent months, negotiations were underway for a return to the democratic transition. Both these men once had close ties to the former despot, Omar al-Bashir, who ruled the country with an iron fist, as we said, until 2019. And then these two same men helped oust al-Bashir in a military coup amid a popular uprising. The two generals have since fallen out and are now clashing over the planned integration of the RSF into Sudan's military. This triggered the current violence. But at the heart of this crisis is actually the personal rivalry between the two men over who will ultimately control the armed forces and the country.
مناسبة عيد الفطر المبارك وبلادنا أصابها جرح بالغ حيث سقط القتلى والجرحى وتشردت الأسر ودمرت المنشآت والمنازل، فالخراب والدمار وأصوات الرصاص ما تركت مجالا لفرح يستحقه أهلنا في كل ربوع بلادنا الحبيبة، فإننا لجد حزينون لهذا المآل، لكن يبقى الأمل الدائم في أننا مع شعبنا العظيم سنتجاوز هذه المحنة ونخرج منها أكثر وحدة وقوة وتماسك.
Now, many observers of the region fear that unless swiftly ended, the current conflict could well end in a civil war, with even regional and international actors cashing in for their own vested interests, ranging from money and arms supplies to territorial control. What do the two warring parties really want? General Dagalo has said that the 2021 coup was a mistake, and he has tried to present himself and the RSF as being on the side of the people. While he has some support, others find this message hard to believe, given the paramilitary forces' brutal track record. General Burhan, on the other hand, has said the army will fully hand over power only to an elected government, further sidelining civilian representatives who were expected to be a part of a power-sharing deal. But there are suspicions that both these military men and their supporters only care about their own wealth and influence and want to somehow cling to power using any means at their disposal. The continued fighting between forces loyal to the Sudan army chief and supporters of rapid support forces has quashed hopes for a ceasefire. Now, according to the World Health Organization, more than 400 people have been killed and over 3,500 injured in the ongoing fighting in Sudan in the last 1 week. Most of these people were civilians. Thousands have been forced to flee the capital of Khartoum. Some of the fiercest battles have taken place in Khartoum, home to almost 6 million people, most of whom are trapped in their own homes without food, water, and electricity. That's how bad things are. Much of the fighting between the two military factions is taking place in urban areas, and civilians have become the biggest casualty. RSF fighters have moved into densely populated areas. The Sudanese Air Force has mounted airstrikes in the capital. And every single morning since the 15th of April, residents of Sudan's capital have woken up to the thunder of airstrikes and the crackle of gunfire. Armed men have been raiding and looting homes. Needless to say, food, water and medical supplies are fast running out. Why are there fears that external forces could enter the fray and further aggravate the Sudanese crisis? Consider this. Arab countries in the Gulf region have looked to the Horn of Africa in recent years while seeking to project power across the region. The United Arab Emirates, a rising military power that has expanded its presence across the Middle East and East Africa, has close ties to the RSF, which sent thousands of fighters to aid the UAE and Saudi Arabia in their war against Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now, enter Russia, which has long been vying for access to Sudan's strategic Red Sea port. Moscow is in talks to build a naval base, creating a passageway to the Indian Ocean in exchange for sending Khartoum more weapons and military equipment. This ties into Moscow's broader strategy of trying to expand its footprint across the resource-rich Sahel region, a crucial Red Sea trading route for energy shipments to Europe. On top of that, the Wagner Group, a Russian mercenary outfit with close ties to the Kremlin, has made inroads across Africa in recent years and has been operating in Sudan since 2017. The United States and the European Union have imposed sanctions on two Wagner-linked gold mining firms in Sudan accused of smuggling. While the US gives Sudan a hefty sum of direct government assistance, Washington's sway is undercut by the fact that the RSF has an independent revenue stream from its illicit trade scheme, effectively functioning as a state within a state. The Horn of Africa is already one of the world's most volatile regions. Now there's growing concern that the turmoil in Sudan could spill over into neighboring countries like Chad and Eritrea, creating a full-blown regional crisis. Let's now shift our focus to how India is being impacted by the Sudan crisis. Why should India worry about what's going on in Sudan? At least 3,000 Indians are currently trapped in the crisis-hit nation. Some 1,200 of these Indians settled down in Sudan decades ago. One Indian national was among the hundreds of civilians killed in the Sudanese capital. Many of the stranded Indians are professionals working in key sectors in that country. A sizable number of Indian business people who traveled to Sudan to finalize deals before the Eid holidays have been stranded in hotels in Khartoum. Prime Minister Narendra Modi today chaired a high-level meeting to review the security situation in Sudan. The External Affairs Minister, the National Security Advisor, the Ambassador of India to Sudan and several other senior officials were part of this meeting. Prime Minister Modi received a first-hand report of the conditions on the ground with specific focus on the safety of the Indian citizens in that country. The Prime Minister instructed officials to remain vigilant, closely monitor developments, continuously evaluate the safety of Indian nationals in Sudan and extend all possible assistance to them. He said India needed to prepare contingency evacuation plans accounting for the rapidly shifting security landscape and the viability of various options. The Prime Minister also emphasized on the importance of maintaining close communication with neighboring countries in the region. Significantly, India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, has discussed the security situation in Sudan and ways to get stranded Indian nationals out of the war-torn country with the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, during a meeting in New York. Dr. Jaishankar has said, in Sudan, the US, it the UN, I beg your pardon, is at the heart of the efforts to establish a ceasefire, and that is key. Because at the moment, unless there is a ceasefire and there are safe corridors created, it is not safe for people to even come out of their homes. Dr. Jaishankar says the focus is on how to get the diplomatic processes to yield the desired result, which has to be a workable, on-the-ground, observed ceasefire. And then the next step would be to create safe corridors for movement, options for movement, and assembly points.
Most of our meeting was on the Sudan situation. We also, of course, discussed the G20. We also spent some time on the Ukraine conflict, but essentially it was about the Sudan. And in Sudan, the UN is at the heart of the efforts to establish a ceasefire, and that is really key because at the moment, unless there is a ceasefire and unless there are corridors, it's not safe for people really to come out. So the UN is doing its bit, talking to everybody. We of course have obviously very strong interest in the matter because so many Indians are there. You know that in the past we have been in touch with a number of countries. I myself had spoken to the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia and with the UAE. We've been in touch with the Americans. I've also been in touch with my British counterpart.
India has been in contact with key regional players such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Egypt, and global powers such as the United States and the United Kingdom, since intense fighting erupted last week, and exploring ways to evacuate the stranded Indians. Officials say New Delhi has contingency plans in place to ensure the safety and security of Indian nationals. But for now, India has advised its citizens in Sudan to shelter in place amid the fighting. The government has asked Indians in Sudan not to go to the Indian embassy in capital Khartoum, where the fighting has been most intense. The embassy is near the airport in Khartoum. The Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi has told the media that they are focusing on ensuring the safety and well-being of the Indian community, including working on contingency plans and possible evacuation. He said, and I quote, "We are counseling and telling Indians how to stay safe. It's an evolving situation. The embassy is functioning, but we have told people not to go there in person as that zone is witnessing a lot of fighting. People don't live there. Nobody is inside the embassy building." He went on to say, "We have some sense of how many Indians are in Sudan. We don't want to talk about numbers and locations for security reasons. We contacted some Indians after seeing their social media posts. We are keeping a close watch on the situation." The emir spokesperson added, "We are also in touch with various UN bodies that are present there. The UN has a significant presence on the ground." Reports suggest India is in touch with Sudan's army and the RSF for information on ceasefire, humanitarian supplies and how to ensure a safe passage for Indians.
In terms of the situation on the ground, as you are aware, there's been an unfortunate death of an Indian national. His body is currently at a hospital. Finally, after a lot of effort, we have been able to get that body moved from his apartment complex into a mortuary in a hospital. And we are seeing how to get that body either back or with family evacuated. We'll see. Our embassy is in touch with the family of the deceased as well as the medical authorities there. Just to give you a sense, look, the situation on the ground continues to be quite tense. It remains very tense, which renders any movement very risky. So currently our focus is on ensuring the safety and well-being of the individuals wherever they are located.
Meanwhile, the Sudanese ambassador to India, Abdullah Omar Bashir El Hussein, has said the request of the Indian government for the evacuation of its nationals from Sudan is currently under consideration by the authorities. Remember, this won't be the first time that India will be carrying out evacuation operations on a massive scale to rescue Indian nationals stranded in a war-torn foreign country. Over the years, the country has undertaken gigantic efforts to ensure that no Indian is left behind in an adverse situation away from home. Most recently, just days after the Ukraine war erupted in February 2022, India launched Operation Ganga to safely bring back all Indian citizens from that country. This involved enormous diplomatic efforts and outreach to the governments of both Russia and Ukraine, as well as friendly countries in the neighborhood. Of course, it also meant India sending flight after flight carrying aid, emergency supplies, medical personnel and teams of rescue officials to ensure the safe return of those Indian nationals. Multiple union ministers personally flew down to Ukraine's neighborhood to oversee the smooth conduct of these operations, in the process sending out the message that every Indian life matters. Back in 2020, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when the world began going into lockdown mode and life came to a standstill, India launched the Vande Bharat mission and Operation Samudra Setu that brought back over 60 lakh Indians who were stuck in different parts of the world. In 2015, as conflict raged between the government of Yemen and the Houthi rebels, thousands of Indians were stranded and Yemen was not accessible by air due to a no-fly zone announced by Saudi Arabia. Under Operation Rahat, India evacuated nearly 5,600 of its nationals from Yemen. Further back, in 2011, India launched Operation Homecoming to bring back Indian citizens stranded in conflict-torn Libya. Under this operation, India evacuated a whopping 15,400 Indian nationals. And of course, who can forget Operation Airlift, when in 1990, over a lakh Iraqi soldiers armed with hundreds of tanks marched into Kuwait overnight. The royals and VIPs fled to Saudi Arabia, leaving the citizens at the mercy of the intruders. Over 1,70,000 of those stranded in Kuwait were Indians. The Indian government kicked off an evacuation process in which each of these 1,70,000 Indians were airlifted and repatriated to India. That epic saga later became the subject of a Bollywood movie. It is a long list of major evacuations carried out by India. However, the challenge that Sudan presents is a humongous one, and carrying out evacuations from that country may actually prove to be tougher than the evacuations of the past from war-torn countries like Ukraine and Yemen because of various geographical and geopolitical factors.